All right, we're going to get started. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to another Daily Coup Connect. If you're coming back from last week, I'm here again. My name's Alice. I'm a dietitian. I work for WSU Dining Services, doing a lot of work with menu planning, working with students with allergies, and general consultation with students who want to know more about healthy eating and healthy cooking. Today I'm going to focus more on the cooking aspect of things, so how to cook when we're staying at home and sort of confined to our homes and not able to go out to the grocery shop as much. And so that's going to be the focus of today's talk. And feel free to chime in the chat box if you feel like you have a good tip to share. We're pretty informal here, so feel free to share some tips with us as you see fit. So what I'm talking about here today is stay-at-home cooking, and really the goal of what I call stay-at-home cooking is to limit our trip to the grocery store, because right now, you know, it's not the greatest idea to go out to the grocery store every day to pick up ingredients that we want for dinner tonight. So we're trying to limit a trip to the grocery store. We also don't want to sacrifice, flavor or nutrition in our meal. So, we're not going to create meals using all, canned beans, frozen things, everything frozen, microwave meals. It's not going to be like that. We're going to create meals without sacrificing flavor or nutrition. It's still going to be full of vegetables, protein, lots of flavor, but we're going to use some strategies to help us with that. And then also part of this stay-at-home cooking is to use up leftovers. So, a lot of times we may have leftovers in the fridge, we forget about them, and they go to waste after a few days because they go rotten, because we've, kind of lost track of them. So we also want to use up leftovers and reduce our food waste, and that helps us save money, but also save, save the environment, and it's good for all sorts of things. So we're not going to sacrifice any flavor or nutrition. We're going to use up lots of leftovers, but it's still going to be very good food. And these are all just pictures of things that I've made at home in the past couple of years with these similar strategies. So I just have 7 quick tips for stay-at-home cooking. And the first one is really when you're at the grocery store. So the next time you go to the grocery store, think about this. Think about some things you may want to just stock up on for the next couple of weeks so that you won't have to go back to the store again. And a lot of these things are going to be shelf stable. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to buy all shelf stable stuff, but really focusing on some of these items so that you do have these things for later on in the next couple of weeks. So things like grains, typically grains from like your bulk section or just grains you buy in the grains aisle have a long shelf life. So up to usually about 6 months if they're stored properly, sometimes up to a year. So things like flours, oats, any sort of cereals last a very long time. Pastas, rice, bread can last a decently long time if they're stored, if they're frozen. You can also refrigerate bread, although it kind of demeans the quality a little bit, but you can freeze bread for a long period of time as well. Any sort of dried beans or lentils are very shelf stable. Anything canned or frozen, so you can get canned or frozen beans, fruits, vegetables, fish, frozen meats. And a lot of these times when you buy canned or frozen items like meats or fish or vegetables, they're already pre-cooked or sometimes pre-chopped. So in addition to being shelf stable, it's also very convenient because part of the cooking is already done for you. So those are a great shelf stable ingredient to keep on hand. Any sort of nuts or seeds or nut butters, peanut butter is probably the most common one, but if you like to make granola or you just like snacks, keeping things like almonds or cashews on hand just for a snack on, protein-rich snack, a very good thing to keep on hand. Eggs last a long time. Any sort of hard cheese lasts a long time as well as compared to like a soft cheese. Anything fermented or pickled. So in addition to pickles, things like yogurt, sauerkraut, any of those sorts of things will last quite a long time as well. And then produce is a little difficult. You can buy frozen or canned produce, like I mentioned before, but you can also buy fresh produce and have that on hand. Things like apples last a long time. If you're going for fruit apples, any sort of orange or citrus, lemons, limes, grapefruit will last a long time. I also buy bananas. They don't necessarily last long, but you can always make banana bread with it if they go bad, or freeze them for later on. And then with vegetables, things like onions, potatoes, your root vegetables like carrots and celery will last quite a long time, and then squash as well, very hardy vegetables. So those are good things to stock up on to plan for the next maybe 2 weeks or so. You can still buy things like kale, your other leafy greens and such. They won't last as long, but you can certainly plan to use those up first and have them and buy those, have those on your list as well. And then to that point, store foods properly to reduce waste. So I mentioned before, use up the fragile produce first. So if you're going to buy things like kale, which I often buy some sort of leafy green and have that in my shopping cart, that's fine. Just make sure you use that up within the first week, and then save the things like potatoes and carrots for later on in your time between shopping. So I use the things like kale and spinach and peppers and tomatoes first, and then save the other things for later. And then freeze and refrigerate what we can. So there's a great website / app. It's also available on your phone as an app called Food Keeper. And it essentially is a database that lists pretty much any single kind of food you can think of. And if you go into that food, it'll tell you exactly how long that food keeps, depending on how you store it, and then whether or not you can refrigerate it or freeze it, and how long it will keep if you do those things. So that's a great way to, if you don't have any information off the top of your head on how long this will last, that gives you a good estimate. So it'll tell you things like apples can stay fresh up to probably 3 weeks in the refrigerator, bananas maybe a couple of days on the counter, and then however long in the refrigerator. So that's a great website to keep kind of in your back pocket if you want information. Things like lemons will typically keep a long time. I usually zest my lemons when I get home, and then keep the lemon zest in the freezer in a little baggie, so that I have that on hand for flavoring anything I want to flavor, because that will last quite a long time in the freezer as well. 3, get creative with substitutions. So this is a tip that applies really in any situation, not just in this kind of isolation situation, especially if you have a special dietary needs. So I learned a lot of this because I do have certain restrictions in my diet that requires me to substitute a lot of things. So getting creative with substitutions reduces the need to go out to the store, because sometimes, you look up a recipe, you don't have any powdered sugar left. So what do you do if you don't have any powdered sugar and you want to make icing? Well, you can blend up some cornstarch and some regular sugar and make your own powdered sugar. So getting creative with substitutions like that. I've listed some examples here. This isn't necessarily a all comprehensive list, but these are some examples of common things you may be able to substitute. If you don't have buttermilk, you can use milk or non-dairy milk, which is what I typically use, and add some vinegar or lemon juice, about a teaspoon or a tablespoon per cup of milk to make your own buttermilk. Eggs, for baking, you can use about a tablespoon of applesauce, half a mashed banana, either chia seeds or flaxseed, about a tablespoon of that, letting it sit in about 3 tablespoons of water, and letting it gel can replace eggs. You can also use carbonated water to replace eggs, arrowroot starch, aquafaba, which is the chickpea, the liquid you get from a can of chickpeas, about a tablespoon of that can replace an egg as well. So a number of egg substitutes that you can use if you don't have eggs or don't want to use your eggs for baking. Flour. Flour is kind of hard to come by sometimes. Some stores are out of flour, so an alternative could be using some sort of baking mix, like a Bisquick, where it's essentially just flour and baking powder is what Bisquick is, or even cake mix and make cake mix cookies, or any of your alternative flours. So you can make flour by grinding oats in a food processor if you have one, or you can buy certainly alternative flours like almond flour or any of the gluten-free flours. There's a bit of difference in texture in the final product, but it does, for the most part, work as a swap if you do make the initial adjustments. I'll often use cornmeal sometimes when I'm out of flour. I'll just use cornmeal for half of my pancake batter and use the rest of my flour. So about a cup of flour, a cup of cornmeal to make cornmeal pancakes if I don't have enough flour. With protein, you can basically substitute any sort of protein for one another. If you're making ground beef, like a meatloaf, and using ground beef, you can use lentils instead of ground beef to kind of stretch that out a bit and not use all your ground beef. Or if you're making any sort of marinated protein, you can substitute those one for one for the most part. If you don't have any chicken and you have tofu, you can marinate tofu the same way you would chicken. Grains for the most part are interchangeable. Like if you have a recipe that calls for brown rice, you can use quinoa instead, or amaranth, or whatever grains are out there. For the most part, they're very interchangeable. Sweeteners, sometimes if I don't have any maple syrup, I'll use agave in place of that for baking. And it's typically a 1-to-1 swap, liquid sweetener for liquid sweetener. Sometimes if you're swapping solid sugar, so the fine sugar and using liquid sweetener instead, you may want to alter the liquid in the recipe a little bit just to make sure you're not getting a watery batter. But for the most part, those are also interchangeable. If you don't have any nuts and you want to make granola, you can use any kind of nuts you want. You don't necessarily have to stick to the recipe. If you don't have any peanuts, you can use sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds. Vegetables, I would sometimes make pesto. And if I don't have any basil, I'll just use spinach or collard greens in pesto. Or if I don't have any pine nuts for pesto, I'll use walnuts. Acids, if you don't have any, lemon juice, you could use vinegar or lime juice. Spices, for the most part, are pretty interchangeable. It just kind of changes, obviously, the end flavor of what you're making. And then oils and fats as well. If you don't have any butter, you could simply swap, any sort of oil you have for baking. Or if you don't have butter for cooking, you could use any sort of oil, coconut oil, any kind of fat will work for that. So lots of opportunities, obviously, for substitutions. I spent a lot of time on this slide already, just naming a few, but there are others out there, certainly. Another tip, this is more of a general tip, but also works well in this situation for saving time. Cooking in batches and repurposing what you cook for multiple recipes. So this comes in handy for things like grains, any sort of protein, plant-based or animal protein. So for grains, if you're making brown rice, make a lot of brown rice and use that for multiple recipes. So sometimes I'll make a big batch of brown rice for like a stir fry for dinner on Sunday, and then use the same brown rice to make rice pudding for breakfast the next day, and then maybe make something else the day after, or like sushi the day after that. So use that for 3 different recipes. If you're making beans, use that, some for a chili, use some for meatballs the next day, use some for tacos the day after. So in any of those similar situations, bread, sometimes I'll use leftover bread to make bread pudding after I make bread. It goes stale. So lots of examples for that. Soups are also a good way to use leftovers. And then that brings me to my next point, making recipe-less meals. So sometimes if you're a planner, which I'm kind of a planner, you like to plan out exactly what you're eating every single day, and you like to, plan every meal recipe you're gonna have, and then make a shopping list and then buy all those ingredients. And sometimes that can be a lot if you're planning, especially for a 2-week period, to plan every single meal you want to have and look for a recipe for every single meal you're going to have for the next 2 weeks. So relying on a few recipe-less meals, so meals that don't require any sort of recipe to make, is a good way to save some time and also use up any sort of leftovers you have. So things like pizza don't really require much of a recipe. It's just pizza dough and whatever toppings you have, leftover vegetables. You can make any sort of flavor profile you'd like. Soups also fall in that category. Burritos and tacos, we do that pretty often. If we have leftover, tomatoes and peppers and any sort of protein. This picture is jackfruit, which is a pretty popular vegetarian meat alternative using a taco. But we sometimes use lentils in tacos. Anything really goes in burritos and tacos. Stir fry is really easy. Any sort of grain with leftover vegetables, some kind of protein. Salads, pastas. Again, pastas with any kind of sauce with leftover vegetables. Sandwiches and wraps are also good recipe-less meals. So lots of things fall into that category where you can just make something and not actually require looking up anything online or a cookbook to guide you on how to make it. And then that brings me kind of to my next point, using apps of the internet for inspiration. So sometimes you may have, a bunch of ingredients in your pantry and you're not sure what to do with. And one app I like, it's an app and also a website, is called Supercook. And you can sign up for an account. It's totally free. They don't send you any emails. And this basically gives you the opportunity to build a virtual pantry. So you sign up for an account and click on anything, ingredients you have that you happen to have in your pantry, and it'll take that list that you develop and give you create a search filter using those ingredients and populate a bunch of recipes that utilize what you have in your pantry. So, let's say I have some spices, some beans, some rice, some other things in my pantry. I'll throw them on the website in my profile, and it'll give me a list of all the recipes I can make using just those ingredients and nothing else. So that's a great website to have on hand as a tool. You can also look up 2-week meal plans. So because of this situation, a lot of bloggers are creating 2-week meal plans on their website. So if you are a planner and want to plan ahead for your shopping trip, you can search, 2-week quarantine meal plan or something similar, and you'll probably see a few search results of meal plans that are already made for you with recipe lists and a list of ingredients to buy if you're more of a planner, and that's great. A lot of times I'll just simply do a Google search, and if I have 2 ingredients I want to use up, I'll just say I did this last week, recipes with eggplants and chickpeas, and some recipe will pop up and I'll know exactly what I can make. Sometimes I'll look up how to substitute things. So a couple months ago, we were trying to make macaroons that were eggless. So I simply searched, eggless macaroon recipe and came up with this. And it told us to substitute, or it gives a recipe that utilizes coconut milk and cornstarch. And we made macaroons that were completely eggless. And then sometimes I'll, have leftover avocado or whatever else that I want to use up. So sometimes I'll just search ways to use up leftover avocado. And I came up with this avocado peanut butter fudge that way is where this came from. So a number of ways to just strategize how you search on the internet to find recipes that really meet exactly what you're looking for to use up those ingredients. And then last tip is simply to have fun. So a lot of times we get caught up in, I have to make this recipe, it has to be perfect. We see a lot of things on Pinterest or on blogs that look very, very picture perfect. And the reality is the things we cook at home don't necessarily look pretty or don't necessarily taste amazing. But, it's the point of it is sometimes it's to have fun and not stress over those tiny little things. This is a very good time to learn a new skill. If you are, if you've been dying to make sourdough bread, it's kind of they mentioned yesterday, sourdough bread is really trendy right now. If you're dying to make sourdough bread, this is a good time to do it. Or, starting to make kombucha or fermenting things, those kind of long, time-consuming recipes. This is a great time to experiment and have fun with that. This is a sourdough focaccia I made the first time last weekend. So trying those time-consuming recipes if you feel like that's something you could have fun with, but also no pressure if you are not much of a cook and just want to rely on, cooking just to eat. But feel free to have fun, explore a creative side. If you have kids, this is also a great time to get them involved and teach them basic skills, depending on their age, obviously. But simple things like having them stir the batter when you make cookies, or having them, taste test things, or add salt to things, or add spices. Very small things to get them involved. It's a great way to have fun. So have fun with it, and don't stress too much about the little things. And that's really all I have. These are just some more pictures. This is a tofu chicken nugget that I made. This is just tofu that's been frozen twice to give it a nice little chicken-like texture. These are frittatas I made using an alternative flour called chickpea flour. It's basically garbanzo beans that have been pulsed into flour. This is granola made with lentils and oats. So just some additional pictures. If you have questions or want more resources, I didn't have time to name all of the resources I have, but websites for substitutions, there's my email there. Feel free to email me. I'm also on Twitter if you feel like you want to follow me. I sometimes post things that I'm cooking or things that I'm eating on my Twitter pretty often. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.